right?
Yeah.
Is speaking bad about someone freedom of speech?
Well, um,
Legally,
okay. Freedom of speech or freedom of expression is a right which is contained in the Constitution. But one needs to understand that this right or the right to freedom of expression is not obsolete, meaning that in instances the right to freedom of expression can be limited, and once it becomes limited, and once the person transgresses or oversteps the limitation, then you no longer have that freedom of expression which is protected. It then becomes defamation. So there's a fine line between freedom of expression and what we know as defamation. Simply put, defamation means the degrading or the dehumanizing or the belittling of a person's good name
right?
or reputation. That's in essence what defamation is. So, in terms of law, you get different types of laws. You get criminal law, matrimonial law, um, all the different types of laws.
Right.
Defamation falls under law which is called delict, or the law of delict, which is uh, the law of persons. So the law of delict obviously deals with instances where people have wronged other people,
Right.
and defamation falls under this part of the law. And when we talk about defamation, we need to understand that defamation has certain elements to it which need to be present in order for it to amount to defamation. And there are three major elements which need to be identified or overcome in order for any claim of defamation to obviously uh, succeed or match the category of amounting to defamation. For purposes of this video, obviously, we're just going to briefly touch on the three aspects of defamation. And we need to understand that not anything or everything said amounts to defamation. It needs to match the elements, and the elements need to be there for it to be. So, in order to understand what amounts to defamation, you need to identify firstly whether the three elements of defamation are present. The first one is wrongfulness. So, when we talk about wrongfulness, we speak about basically the infringement of the person's rights to his or her good name, or their rights to their reputation. And it doesn't matter whether what you're saying is true or not. That's not an aspect of defamation. A statement can be false as well. But the fact of the matter is, if whatever you said infringes on the person's right to his good name or his reputation, that means his standing in community or how he's perceived in the business community or wherever, that amounts to uh, wrongfulness. And the test for wrongfulness, or how we as lawyers or in the legal profession identify whether something amounts to an act of wrongfulness, is that we equate the action of what a person does against that of what a reasonable person would do. So it's called the reasonable person test. So we'd say that if I say XYZ about a person, would the reasonable person, which is a fixatious, good, law abiding person, which is a reasonable man, fixatious meaning imaginary, there's no such person in this world as a reasonable person, but the law has this imaginary legal reasonable person, which it uses to say that if Mr. X said something about Mrs. Y, would a reasonable person accept what Mr. X has said as amounting to defamation, or would he accept it as not amounting to defamation? And if the reasonable person would accept it as amounting to defamation, that's what the law uses to identify as you having transgressed, because a reasonable person in your position would accept what you said as being defamation. So they use a reasonable person test to identify whether something said against a person's good name or reputation is indeed wrongful or not. The second thing is, the onus, which is the degree of proof, rests on a person claiming to be defamed. So if Mr. X says something to Mrs. Y, it's Mrs. Y's duty
To
prove that what Mr. X said amounts to wrongfulness, which means the reasonable person test comes into play. And if it's proven that the reasonable person would accept it as being defamation, then she needs to obviously prove it, to say that based on this aspect, a reasonable person would accept it as defamation, and therefore what you said amounts to wrongfulness. That's step number one.
Right.
Step number two, intention. Far too often we obviously say things which we don't mean, and obviously we say things in anger sometimes. And when a person alleges that the next person has defamed him, you need to make sure that you are aware, or you have reason to believe, that the person who made the defamatory remarks against you had the intention to do so. So this element obviously is a bit difficult to prove, but it can be supported by obviously evidence or other words which may be used in separate instances. So for instance, if I call Mrs. Y a bad name in one comment, and in my subsequent comment I reply to someone, or I tell them, yeah, but she deserves it. The words "she deserves it" solidifies or confirms my actions of the first instance, where what I said was said in a way which means that I intended it to have been said.
Yes.
I can't come back and say,
yes.
I responded to that person saying she deserves it,
But
I felt that, you know what, I made it in, I was just joking. Because your what you say and your actions that are subsequent to what you do either confirms, denies, or
So
affirms.
basically, we need to be very careful.
You need to be very careful of what you say, and you need to be very careful of what you
What
say
you
to
did.
people after the fact as well, because intention can be constructed post what you said by words which you use to, obviously, like how we said, to say that she deserves it. It means that you intended for whatever you spoke to have or to amount to defamation. And if you, as the person, feel that you didn't intend to do it, now from wrongfulness, remember the onus was on the person claiming to be defamed to prove that there was wrongfulness.
Yes.
On intention, it's not the person who's claiming to be defamed to prove that you had intention. It's the duty on a person who denies intention to prove that he did not intend to do it. So Mrs. Y proved wrongfulness by saying that the reasonable person would have accepted it as defamation.
Right.
Now Mr. X needs to say, listen here, although you say element number one for wrongfulness has been identified and the reasonable person test has been applied, I did not intend to do it because of X, Y, Z. This is where your defense comes into play. And if you have a good defense, you raise the defense and you say, listen here, for whatever reason, I felt that, you know what, I was just giving my opinion about something.
Yes.
And you need to have good legal basis to ensure that your defense stands, and you need to negate, obviously, the element of intention, and you need to disprove that what you said was not intentional. Because in South African law, when the person who proves or claims that what was said to him amounts to defamation, the next person needs to obviously disprove it, and your defense obviously comes into play here. So that's a second aspect, and then obviously with that you can obviously put in your defense to the element of wrongfulness as well, and you can say no, your understanding of what the reasonable person test is different from what my understanding is, because I feel that a reasonable person would not have been defamed. But obviously your issue is not to disprove Mrs. Y's claim. She has to prove it. You don't need to go and open law books and try to disprove her. The onus there rests on her. And then the last thing, and the or him, and the last thing, which is the most important thing of any defamation claim, is publication. Now remember, when you publicize something, you do it in a manner where the next person who receives it
doesn't know.
No, just by receiving it, or just by confirming it, or just by saying, hey, you know what, I saw this post, I agree or I disagree, immediately checks the box where the publication element comes into play and lands you in extreme trouble. Because when a person's good name or their reputation has been obviously defamed, and when a person publicizes this to any third party or potential third party recipient, defamation arises. So if you go on Instagram or Facebook and you go vent your frustrations about how bad X, Y, and Z is, or the service that you receive from Mrs. X's restaurant, or the poor level of service you receive from this company, flight company, who sold you tickets and didn't process a refund, and you're waiting for 2 years since, and all of those things. The moment you go on any third-party platform or public platform where you know third-party people will receive your defamation or your statements which amount to defamation, you fulfill this third element of publication, and
they can basically sue you.
Well, then you meet the criteria of, if you did the wrongfulness, if you did the intention, and if you did the publication.
If a business does something that's not to our liking and we post it,
look,
is that wrong?
I would imagine that in terms of the Consumer Protection Act, remember, a consumer nowadays has rights which are protected.
Right.
But obviously, there's a difference between protected rights in terms of a law or an act, and there are protected rights in terms of the Constitution. So for instance, if you feel that, the service I received from Mrs. X's restaurant was terrible and woeful, and the food was utterly disgusting, and whatever came with it, the first thing you do as a person, not as a consumer, as a person, is you approach the manager or you approach the owner and you identify the issue with them. You bring it to their attention and say, listen, this is what I felt was wrong. This is how I feel aggrieved, and this is what I feel needs to be done to remedy the situation so I can receive adequate compensation. You give the establishment or the person an opportunity to address the issue. Once the issue has not been addressed, then you can go and say that, listen here, I've tried my best to resolve the matter
I can now go to a public platform.
Public platform. Take TripAdvisor for instance.
Right.
TripAdvisor is a platform for hotels or hotel reviews. You go on and you say, listen here, I've experienced cockroaches in my room or whatever it is. Right. The resort has a right to reply. They'll say, we're sorry to hear about your experience. We brought it up with our housekeeping team. We shall investigate the matter. Please contact us and we'll address it. If they didn't respond, you have a right to say, listen here, this is my experience. It's a public forum. This is my experience, and I'm stating what I've experienced, and this is where it ends. So the person against whom the complaint is made, or even whether they don't respond, still receives it and still can address it, whether they wish to address it on the platform or whether they wish to ignore it and address it internally. Right. That can be done. But the minute you go on and say that, listen here, this is a stupid establishment, the person who owns it is an idiot, I've eaten at better places such as X, Y, and Z, you doing what you're not supposed to do. You are defaming the person's good name.
Or if you call them a thief.
Say hypothetically you paid someone for services, and a mechanic, for instance, and a mechanic fixes your property but doesn't do a good job and returns it to you, and you say that, listen here, I've paid you X amount, you've done only a small amount of work, the balance of the work you haven't accounted for, whatever, you're a thief, everybody has a right to know that you're shady and a dodgy person. Venting out your frustrations about a certain level of service you did not receive is not carte blanche for you to go and defame someone. You have no right to do that. You, especially on a public forum, you have to address it with the establishment or the person, and failing which, you can approach the consumer ombudsman. As a consumer, you have a right. Go to the ombudsman, say, listen here, this is what I feel is lacking in this transaction, and let them address it. But do not go and defame any person's good name or reputation, and then expect your actions to be justified in a form of, no, it was my opinion, or I'm just putting a review, or
so basically a review can be of your experience, but not calling them a thief, a liar.
I can't review something and say, okay, listen here, the ball I purchased is not right for X, Y, and Z. The stitching wasn't done properly. The tube is of a terrible quality, and I'm unhappy. That's where it ends. But I can't say, hey, listen here, soccer family, don't go to this football shop. Their products are all old stock or whatever it is. I purchased this from them, and
so basically you can't name and shame a company or person.
You have no right to do that, because the minute someone feels like how we've discussed about that anything said about them amounts to defamation, you're in serious trouble.
So you can talk about your personal experience or something, but not with naming and shaming a person, a product.
Service quality can always, or level of service quality can always be addressed.
Right.
You've got forums such as Hello Peter, TripAdvisor. These are all public forums where people go and rate the quality of service they received. And there are responses from corporates on their platforms where they say, listen here, we acknowledge there was a problem. Please communicate with us privately so we can address it. Or we have addressed the issue, now you can, now the matter is resolved. Those are public forums. And people do have, can use those avenues as ways of, stating their experiences. But you can't go and dissuade or persuade whichever instance you want to use it, from using the services of a company because you feel that they or the next person has a right to know that you've been treated in a manner which wasn't good, and at the same time you feel that by defaming them or preventing someone from going to support them is a means of safeguarding the next person. Your job is not to safeguard.
It's good to know.
We got a consumer ombudsman for that. Your
Right.
job is to obviously be satisfied with what you get or dissatisfied, and if dissatisfied, address it with the management or the owners or whatever it is, and from there, wait for the matter to be resolved amicably. And if you don't, you open yourself up to a case of defamation. The legal process will proceed.
Okay, so let's talk of defamation. So if someone does defame you on social media or on Facebook, what can a normal business person do?
So a normal business person who feels that whatever was said to him, about him, to a third party, remember, it needs to be published to be a defamation.
So like
remember, we're
posted.
only discussing defamation here.
Right.
So defamation needs to meet the requirements, and that one requirement is publication.
Right.
If I say something to you personally, and it's not published, it's not defamation.
Oh.
Do you understand? But the minute a third party receives it, or minute someone comes across it on a social media platform such as Facebook or Instagram or whatever, then just by that person who repeats it or who merely confirms what you said about the next person in a way where it says, yeah, I agree with you, or spot on, dude, or good on you, or whatever. And it happened in the past. I'm not talking about make-believe stuff. If you go and see the certain big cases that have occurred in recent years with race-based discrimination and defamation.
Yes.
I'm so scared to even go on Facebook and like a post, because by you liking a post, if you saying, listen here, the sky is blue, the sky is green, and I go like that post,
You're agreeing.
I'm agreeing with what you're saying, and I'm agreeing with the concept that you have adopted towards your reasoning of why the sky is green. Well, maybe you even didn't say a reason why. Maybe you said the sky is green and didn't give a reason why. And I liked your comment, or I agreed with you. I'm agreeing to what you are saying, and I'm agreeing to what I feel is the truth behind what you're saying. And or whether it's not even the truth, even if I'm just agreeing with that statement. Remember, defamation doesn't need to be truthful. It can be a false statement, also can be defamation.
Right.
So by just saying that I agree means that, you know what, I'm making myself just as bad as a person who's stating the words.
So if a person is defamed, what's the process? You go to an attorney, what do you do? Like a normal person of the public?
Depending on your budget, you can go to legal aid, you can go to an attorney, you can go to small claims court, whichever avenue is available. You can go to a law clinic. These are all avenues available to you to get legal advice or legal counsel.
Right.
Once you receive your legal counsel, the important thing for any lawyer, obviously I speak for myself, I can't speak for others, is to immediately stop the process of defamation, or stop the actions which caused defamation, or stop what amounted to defamation.
So if someone posts something, or it's live, or on like it's currently on the page or posted, what is that person's
remember, you need to identify
next
it. You need to do whatever we discussed. You need to say what they said was wrongful,
right,
or wasn't supposed to have been there,
right,
because it amounts to a personality and injury to dignity,
person. Right.
And then the second thing is, you need to say that, you know what, obviously they intended to do it, and by doing that they obviously have left it on their platform. A person doesn't merely go and insult someone for 5 minutes and removes it,
right,
or not even by removing it, won't simply put something up on a social media platform without having the intention of making sure that the person against whom they publicizing this defamatory remarks, they intended to do that. I can't see how a person can say, but I had no intention to defame. All I wanted was just to speak the truth.
So basically, you're saying if someone does posts of any business, or specifically because this is happening all the time, and people don't know what to do, so they need to get immediately hold of an attorney so that he can send them whatever needs to be done to stop that process from further damage.
From further damage, because remember, the longer a person's reputation or good standing is injured,
right,
stands to be injured,
right,
the higher the claim for damages which can arise in terms of compensation are available to the person.
So if someone leaves it out there and to damage your good name, that means you can actually sue them you can get compensation from someone for damaging your name.
Yeah, this case law which where certain members of our legal profession were also called thieves, and the defendant obviously was sued, and the case was successful in that by just merely saying that the person is a thief and the next person walking in a corridor heard it and confirms that sort of publication element, and you fulfill the elements,
wow,
that becomes defamation. And the scary thing is, you can claim 50,000, you can claim 100,000, you can claim 150,000, whatever amounts to patrimonial and non-patrimonial damages, whether you suffered financial loss, whether you suffered emotional stress, whether you suffered shock, whether you suffered trauma, whether you need to go for therapy, whether you need to go, there's so many elements that come into play, and there's certain things which we need to understand as people, that your actions have such consequences at times that rather don't do it. And one example I'm going to give you is, there's something which in law we address as thin skull cases. People are born with what is called a thin skull. Now, when you didn't know that, right? So your lining of the skull is much more thinner than a normal person.
Right.
So hypothetically, when someone smacks a person, it can be assault, right? Depending on how severe it is, it could be assault or assault GBH, which is a grievous bodily harm, and you could get criminally charged for assault, and you have to go defend yourself and whatever else. But if I smacked you and I've assaulted you, and later you sustain injury, you had internal bleeding, and you passed on, then it becomes murder. And you can't come say, but you know what, I had no intention of killing him. It was what you call it, a culpable homicide. Because the minute you hit somebody, knowing that, you know what, okay, there's two elements which come into play. Much was discussed in the Oscar Pistorius case about unforeseen circumstances and eventualities and all of those things. But in a nutshell, certain things or actions do have certain repercussions far beyond what people initially imagine.
Right.
And you can't come back and say, but you know what, I did not intend for it to go this far, or I did not intend for people to start copying this defamatory remarks and sharing it, or
right.
Because the minute you start something, it becomes a spiral.
Or it could be trending, or
it could be
goes
viral, and you as a creator then become responsible for everyone's actions, and that the consequences which stem, if I lose money financially because you call me a thief, and the next person who doesn't come to me because they heard that, listen, this guy is a rogue and he's the thief and my money is not safe with him, my loss, patrimonial loss, is as a result of your defamation. your big mouth. And that will continue to escalate and cause problems for me until you address it. And how you address it is immediately attorneys will ask you to withdraw your statement.
Right.
And in that, you would tender an apology.
Right.
Because you, as a person who defames the next person, if I tell you that, listen here, you are like this and like that, I've caused people to see you in a light different from what they would have originally seen you.
Right.
Now my reputation becomes, now my reputation is on the line. My personality rights become injured. My good name or good standing in the community becomes impaired. Because of my
doings. Okay.
So now the attorney will tell you, remove what you said immediately.
Right.
Failing which will bring an interdict if you don't remove it. An interdict is an urgent court process which allows a person who's seeking an interdict to succeed if the elements are met.
Right.
And secondly, when you remove your defamatory remarks or whatever, you need to tender an apology.
Okay.
So, for instance, if I
call someone
a thief and I said you stole my money or you've taken money of mine and you haven't paid me back, or you're a rogue, or whatever it is,
right,
I need to apologize. Now, as a person, I can't tell you what to say, because if I'm telling you to apologize, and we're talking about common sense here, I know that, listen here, what I've said was defamatory or defaming. My apology needs to be sincere. I can't say, yeah, you know what, I've been asked, in apologizing, you need to be sincere. And far too often it happens that when people apologize, they apologize with such arrogance, that they'll say, but I told him it's over. That's not an apology. Or it's fine, it's done. Like, what's the issue? Words which are not in a form of an apology are not apologies. And if I, for instance, bumped your car and I'm apologizing, the first thing I'll say is, listen here, I'm sorry for bumping your car. That's what I would do. And then I'll say that, listen here, having been sorry for bumping your car, I'll tell you that I might have been driving over the limit, and I couldn't apply my brakes timelessly, and that's why I've collided with you. This is the reason why this accident had occurred, and you know what? I've learned my lesson. In future, I will adhere to the speed limits, or I'll keep my safe following distance so that I don't repeat the same mistake, or so that my action would never again amount to damaging or accidentally bumping the next person. Typical apology. So you need to identify the issue. You need to state the reason for your apology. You need to explain in sincerity why you will not do what you did by driving fast, or by bumping you, or by failing to apply your brakes, or by causing injury to you, or by being negligent in not wearing a seatbelt, or whatever you feel is your reason for wanting to apologize. And then lastly, you need to show remorse. By showing remorse, you need to say, I will not be doing this again, or I've learned from my mistakes, or I've learned from my actions, and I know that these actions have consequences, and I, for one, am the first to pick up my finger and say that, listen here, I will not be doing it again, and please accept my apology. Because remember,
do they have to also apologize for calling you what they have called?
Whatever. That's why I'm saying you need to identify the issue. Oh. And remember, an apology is a request. The person the recipient of the apology needs to receive it. When we talk about telling someone that, you know what, I'm sorry I hurt you. If that person doesn't accept your apology, it's over.
Oh, yes.
The person needs to accept, unless you can prove that you've done so much to request that the apology be accepted, and the person is just being difficult and not accepting, that's a different story.
Right.
But if you've done so much as saying that, you know what, I've identified the issue which was of contention, or which caused obviously me wanting to, or me needing to apologize. I've apologized for my actions, which were bumping the car, not applying my brakes timelessly, whatever. And remorse, or well, firstly, sincerity to say that I'm deeply sorry. I understand what I did was wrong, because you can't apologize for something you don't know what you apologize for. You can't say, oh, you want an apology? Okay, fine, here's an apology. Take it.
I was forced.
What are you apologizing for? Be sincere. Say, I understand that I've hurt your feelings, or I've said certain things that have offended you, and that have in this case amounted to defamation. Please accept it as my apology. Please accept my apology as being sincere and remorse. I will not be doing that again. I've learned from my lessons, and
Okay.
And then the recipient will receive it. The recipient can decide whether she accepts it or not, and obviously the matter tends to end there. But don't be arrogant. Don't go and defame businesses. Don't go and tell restaurant owners that their food is disgusting, and then at the same time go on social media and invest against the poor service you received. Because remember, what you're doing is not solving a matter. You're just creating further problems, which once become legal processes, can be devastating to you financially and can have serious implications.
Okay.
So yeah, be good humans.
Can I ask one more last question?
What?
Why are lawyers so expensive?
Well, lawyers charge for their time, and we all know the same time is money. And I'll tell you something. My boss told me. He said that, you know what, the nice thing about lawyers is that you need to know every profession has a fee, whether it's for business selling products, or if it's for service to repair something, or if it's for service to administer something, whatever it is, there's a fee. But lawyers are the only people who can't afford their own time. And the reason why is because lawyers charge by the hour. And in 24 hours of the day, if lawyers charge for their time, they themselves can't afford their own time. So that's the joke we say with lawyers, is that, you know what, lawyers aren't expensive. It's just fees are their time, and time is money.
Okay. Bye-bye.